What's up gamers, DreamcastGuy here, and this is going to be my brutally honest review of the BioShock Collection on Nintendo Switch, because in my opinion, these are some of the most important single-player shooters that have ever been made. They managed to combine things like really tight controls, some gorgeous environments, and most importantly, a story that's based around some deep philosophy. These games are fantastic, and I've been very obsessed with them over the course of the last 10 years, to the point at which I've actually tracked down this game on every console. I've even gotten the Remastered Trilogy on other systems like the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. I even found the strange BioShock book. I have BioShock tattoos. I absolutely love BioShock, but it's for this reason that I've decided to be hypercritical in my review. I want to look at what this version of the game does exceptionally well and highlight the parts that I hope can be improved. Now let's start off by explaining what this version of the game is. So the BioShock Trilogy is actually fundamentally different in some slight ways from the original BioShock. If you played these games back in the day and you thought, okay, these are cool, I actually recommend that you pick it up again because these have a lot of added content. This combines all the original DLCs for the games, which are substantial and give a lot of extra lore and plot. There's fun time travel-y stuff. There's an extra battle mode. I mean, seriously, if you just look at the added content, there is a ton of hours of really exciting stuff that adds to the BioShock universe beyond just extra levels and stuff. These feel like something that is new and different. And part of this is, just as a fun little developer note, the DLC of these games were done by separate teams. So I kind of like going through it, especially in order. It's nice to beat BioShock 1, BioShock 2, then go into Minerva's Den and see all the stuff chronologically as it came out. Now this kind of stuff is really interesting to a hyper fan or people who are already aware of what BioShock is, but let's just zoom out. Let's talk more generally. What is this? BioShock is 3 separate games. 2 take place in an underwater city called Rapture that is so haunting and gorgeous, it's been basically taken over by the geniuses who built it. Everybody who's down there has started to splice their own DNA, modifying themselves into being the perfect beings, which has of course driven them completely insane. The first 2 games are literally very, very dark. They have broken light bulbs, creepy macabre moments, and a lot of art deco that makes you just question your sanity as you try and line up the next headshot. They are incredibly well paced. That is the biggest thing that I think has made them so legendary. Is it really goes beyond the fact that there's good writing or cool graphics. It's the fact that everything just works. It fits together to allow nice jump scares and crazy moments where you upgrade a gun and feel extra strong. They really, really work, but I've always had a soft spot for Bioshock Infinite, where suddenly we leave the ocean and go up to the skies to a floating city called Columbia. And I love this game a lot because they make everything have this too bright aesthetic. Everything just looks like it's just sun bleached to the point of obscurity, and it's so cool for it. It makes it where you could be having a firefight in broad daylight against police and somehow feel like you're still shivering in fright. It's still creepy to see all these people that have chosen to live in such an egregiously bizarre place. I like the entire BioShock trilogy a lot. I think that they managed to work, but when you combine them together, they really managed to excel even more so. These are games that individually are fantastic, but combine them together and they become a masterpiece. This trilogy really surpasses any other single-player shooter I have ever seen in my life. It's pretty clear how good these games are because they've truly stood the test of time. Now I want to go a little bit more into the technical aspects because this is where I do have a couple issues. While minor, I do think that they're important to mention. So let's talk about the main thing that you're probably curious about, which is handheld mode. Most people who buy a game multiple times, especially if it's on the Nintendo Switch, is because you want to play it portably. You want to have a chance to play this game anywhere, anytime. Well, I do think that when it comes to handheld, these games run very, very well. It is a clean set of graphics, there's no real frame rate issues, it doesn't even seem to drain the battery particularly quick, possibly because these are games that were made for last-gen hardware. It is a a very, very smooth experience. I can definitely see myself going through this again and again, but because these games have a lot of like audio dialogue and some very, very expert voice acting, I do think that this is one of those projects that requires headphones. You are not going to get the same experience out of those tiny little speakers on your Nintendo Switch. I do think that if you're going to buy this game, make sure you have some headphones set up, that way you can enjoy this game as it was intended. When you're playing it on handheld, I do think you also notice a little bit more one of the technical problems I have this, which is that the darks are definitely too dark. This game at times, it tries to make itself so spooky and shadowy that the entire visuals get a little bit washed out. This does kind of make sense within the context of the universe. I mean, you are at the bottom of the ocean. This is a place where light doesn't exist. Of course, it's going to be very, very dark, but a lot of these hallways are just so overcast that it's very difficult to even see where you're going. This footage, I tried to record everything with the default level of brightness. So if you just picked up the game and turned it on, this is exactly what it's going to look like. And there are times where a guy would be popping out of a closet with a hook for a hand, and I didn't even see him until after he had hit me 4 times because the entire room was pitch black. It's not necessarily a huge detriment, but I do wish that they'd managed to do a little bit to tweak the brightness, specifically on BioShock 1. I think that BioShock 2 manages to do things better. BioShock 3, of course, Infinite, completely nails it. The fact that they went with this creepy, brighter look definitely works, but I think that BioShock 1, it's aged the most when it comes to lighting. Speaking more directly about the graphics and stuff, though, I can definitely say that each of these games still looks magnificent. The fact that these were made like, what, 14, 15 years ago? I mean, just a huge amount of time ago. It's kind of crazy. It boggles the brain that this stuff is so old. They still look pretty dang magnificent. I mean, a lot of this stuff still completely functions at managing to be creepy and offsetting as it did all those years ago. But I do think that there is this strange, I don't know if it's a glitch or it's an engine error, but whenever you're playing these games, occasionally there are sections where you're in a room that is filled with water. I mean, if you're living at the bottom of the sea, you're gonna occasionally see spills, breaks, cracks in the glass, and some water is going to spill out. Well, in every scene of BioShock 1 and BioShock 2, where there is a lot of water involved, it seems like the engine would have to dramatically reduce the resolution to try and keep the frame rate steady. There were pretty much no frame rate problems, except for one thing, which I'll talk about here in a second. But when I was running around, you can see that this is a pretty obvious dip in graphics and resolution that it has to sacrifice in order to keep the game running smooth. I mean, it's strange looking, but I can't necessarily say that it's bad because I think that this is the better choice. If it was going to crash the frame rate or crash the resolution, I prefer resolution because it makes it where I can still react, I can still solve puzzles, I can still fight, even if it does look a little bit closer to 580p instead of 720 or 1080p. Now, back on the topic of frame rate. The entire trilogy runs at a very good frame rate that's at least steady. The tiny problems I did have were very oddly involving the cutscenes. Whenever there was stuff with like crowds or some person giving like a big epic speech, these are the only times where there were tiny stutters, which were not super noticeable, but I definitely sort of caught my eye. They're just something that kind of took me out of the moment, especially because I was playing it on my TV and not handheld, so it's weird to just suddenly see things get really, really choppy randomly without notice. But I guess for the most part, this all works. I mean, it's still BioShock. It's BioShock that's exceptionally well, and now it's BioShock that can even go in your pocket, literally, if you have a Switch Lite. The only other downside is that you have to consider the fact that this is by far the most expensive version of this masterpiece. Now, just as an example, I purchased the original games on sale for like, 99 cents each. If you buy this on last gen consoles, it is super stupidly just cheap as heck. Now, even if you decide to get the newer versions of the BioShock Collection itself, this goes on sale constantly for about $10, which means that if you're buying this game on the Nintendo Switch, here in America, this costs $50, which means you're paying 5 times the cost to play it on a handheld. Now, portability is cool, but you do need to try and realize that this is what you're paying for. Now, personally, I don't mind the cost. I love BioShock so much, and as a mega fan of the franchise, I'm completely comfortable paying a $50 price tag to get 3 very good games that are 10 to 15 hours each, especially because these have optional game modes. They have increased difficulties that really change the mechanics from respawns to making it where you can't buy as much ammo. These games are fundamentally so different and so good together that I don't mind at all that I spent $50 on it, even as we look past the tiny technical errors. Okay, so we've heard some good and some bad, but let's go over the ratings board and put a big number on it. I am giving the BioShock Collection on Nintendo Switch a 9 out of 10. If you've ever been curious about this series, but you just weren't sure when to jump on, now is an amazing time. I definitely recommend these games very strongly to casuals and to hardcores. These games are definitely worth the price. If you're broke though, and you have it on another system, like if you own a PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, I also just recommend any version of the BioShock Collection. They're all great, you can't lose, they're definitely a good time. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. When I was filming that handheld footage, my cat kept slamming his head into the Switch. So I'm glad that I was able to get at least a couple seconds of it. What a bad cat. I mean, he's a good cat, but man, what a bad cat. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.